The aroma of rosemary chicken filled every corner of the house as Emily adjusted the timer on the oven and stepped back to check the dining room. Everything had to be perfect. Her husband's family was arriving soon, and she had spent the entire week planning the menu, polishing the wine glasses, and making sure the guest towels in the bathroom were neatly folded. It was their first time visiting since she and Aaron had moved into the new house, and she wanted everything to go smoothly. The table had been set with care. Cream-colored napkins folded into triangles, silverware polished to a soft shine, and tall glasses ready for water or wine. She glanced at the clock on the stove. It was 6:10. They were due to arrive in 20 minutes. The roast still needed 10 more, and the bread was warming in the oven. The salad was already prepared and resting in the fridge, the dressing in a small jar beside it. Emily wiped her hands on the dish towel and peeked into the mirror by the entrance. Her dress was still neat, hair tucked up with a few strands left to frame her face. She looked tired, but happy. It had taken a lot of effort to make this evening happen. Aaron's family wasn't hard to please, but his mother always looked at everything as if she were silently judging, and his father rarely said more than a few dry comments about business or politics. Still, she had done her best. Aaron was upstairs getting ready, and Emily was about to call out to ask if he had seen the extra chairs when she remembered they were still in the garage. They had only 8 chairs in the dining set, and with Aaron's parents, his younger sister, and her boyfriend coming, plus their teenage son, they needed more seating. Emily stepped into the hallway and opened the garage door, flipping on the light. The garage smelled like cardboard and car oil. They hadn't unpacked everything since the move, and boxes still sat stacked against the far wall. She walked past the recycling bin and Aaron's old bike, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor. The folding chairs were stored behind a tall shelf filled with tools and camping gear. As she reached for the first chair, she heard something. It was a faint clicking sound, like a phone being unlocked. Then a voice. Not loud, but close. She paused, her hand still on the metal frame of the chair, and turned her head toward the source. The garage shared a wall with Aaron's home office, and the sound was coming through the thin vent by the ceiling. She froze when she heard her name. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then came Aaron's voice, clear and low, almost careful. It was the way he spoke when he didn't want to be overheard. Another voice responded. A woman. Emily didn't recognize it. She moved closer to the wall, standing beneath the vent without making a sound. The woman was laughing softly. Then came a comment about how perfect everything would be tonight, and how Emily always worked so hard to please everyone. Aaron didn't answer right away, but when he did, the words hit like a wave. He said something about timing, about how it wouldn't be much longer now, about how Emily would never see it coming. The woman said something in return that Emily couldn't make out, but Aaron's reply came clearly. Something about dividing the assets. Something about his lawyer already drawing up papers. Something about her not needing to know until after dinner. Emily's hand tightened around the chair's edge. Her breathing slowed until she wasn't sure she was even taking in air. She felt like she was watching someone else, someone standing there in a garage that smelled like cardboard and oil, listening to their husband plan the end of their marriage with another woman. She didn't move for several minutes. Her mind tried to catch up with what she'd heard, but it couldn't. This was the man who had asked her to move into this house with him, who had kissed her forehead that morning and said she was beautiful even before her hair was done. This was the man she had stayed up late for, making chicken stock from scratch, because he said his mother would appreciate the effort. Eventually, the voices stopped. Emily took a breath, then another. She picked up 2 folding chairs and walked back into the house, her movements calm and measured. She placed the chairs at the dining table as if nothing had happened. She returned to the kitchen, checked the roast, and took out the bread. The knife for carving rested on the counter, clean and shining. Everything looked just the way it should. Aaron came downstairs 5 minutes later, dressed in a gray button-up shirt and black slacks. He kissed her cheek and told her everything smelled amazing. She smiled. It felt like her face wasn't even attached to her body. When the doorbell rang at 6:30 exactly, Emily answered it with the same warm smile she had practiced earlier in the mirror. She welcomed Aaron's parents inside, helped them hang their coats, and complimented his mother on her necklace. His sister followed, laughing too loudly, her boyfriend trailing behind her. Their son had earbuds in and didn't say much. Aaron offered them drinks while Emily returned to the kitchen. From the corner of her eye, she saw him glance at his phone. A message came in. He read it quickly and slipped the phone into his pocket. When he met her gaze, he smiled the same way he always had. She smiled back. She took the roast out of the oven and set it on the counter, careful not to look at the knife. Her heart was still beating, but slower now. More focused. Dinner would be perfect. It had to be. Just like he said. Emily placed the roast in the center of the table, garnished it with sprigs of herbs, and returned to the kitchen without a word. The sounds of laughter and small talk floated from the dining room. Aaron's father was telling a story about traffic or construction, something mundane that got a few polite laughs. His mother's voice was sharp and clear, offering comments on the new curtains and how much better they were than the ones in their old apartment. Emily responded with a soft nod and a small smile each time she passed by, carrying plates and side dishes to the table. Her hands moved automatically. She poured drinks, served the salad, and placed warm bread into the basket. Her mind, though, had become a quiet tunnel. Each action was part of a list she followed without thinking. It helped. If she focused on the routine, the rhythm, she didn't have to think about the voices she had heard just minutes before. Aaron pulled out the chair for his mother and helped her sit. He did the same for his sister. He even touched Emily's back lightly as she passed behind him, like he always did when guests were over. She didn't react. Inside, she felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper. A quiet alertness, like watching a fire burn from behind a locked door. Once everyone had taken their seats, Emily sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Aaron lifted his glass and thanked everyone for coming. He made a toast to family, to their new home, to fresh beginnings. His mother smiled. His father nodded. His sister clapped softly. Emily raised her glass too, pretending not to notice how Aaron's phone screen lit up twice while he spoke. They started eating, and the usual conversation filled the room. Aaron's sister talked about her trip to Greece, showing photos of white buildings and blue water. Her boyfriend added a few jokes that made everyone laugh, though Emily couldn't remember them a second later. The teenage son didn't speak unless asked, chewing slowly while looking at the floor. Aaron's parents asked about the neighborhood, the new schools, the grocery store options. Emily answered everything with care. She described the nearby parks, the clean sidewalks, the quiet nights. She mentioned how the woman at the market already knew her by name. She smiled at all the right moments. But behind every word was the echo of that garage vent and the sound of her name in someone else's voice. She watched Aaron closely. He acted as if nothing had happened. He laughed, he ate, he complimented the food. Once or twice he glanced in her direction, as if waiting for a clue. She gave him nothing. Not yet. When dessert was mentioned, Emily excused herself and returned to the kitchen. She opened the fridge and pulled out the lemon tart she had made the night before. She set it on the counter, then leaned on the edge of the sink. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed her palms flat on the countertop to stop them. She thought of everything. The texts he'd been hiding lately, the sudden business trips, the change in his tone. It had all built up, slowly. But she had told herself to ignore it. She believed they were just going through a phase. She believed in effort, in staying strong, in fixing things. But now she had heard it. She couldn't unhear it. She cut the tart into even slices and placed them on small plates. As she picked up the first two plates, Aaron appeared in the kitchen doorway. He offered to help, and before she could answer, he reached for two plates himself. Their hands brushed. His fingers lingered. He looked at her like nothing had changed. She felt her chest tighten but smiled and nodded. They walked back to the table together, handing out the plates one by one. Emily returned to her seat, folding her napkin neatly in her lap. The conversation drifted again. This time, it turned to their future plans. Aaron's mother asked about children. His sister joked that she was waiting for news. Emily replied with a laugh that sounded real, even though it wasn't. Aaron said they were taking things slow, focusing on building their life together first. After dessert, the family began gathering their things. Aaron helped his mother with her coat. His father thanked them for the meal. His sister kissed Emily's cheek and whispered that the lemon tart was perfect. Her boyfriend nodded in agreement. The son didn't say much, but he waved goodbye. Emily stood in the doorway and smiled until the last car pulled away. She waved once more before closing the door. The lock clicked softly into place. She turned around. Aaron was already in the living room, loosening his collar and setting down his glass. He looked relaxed, as if nothing had happened, as if tonight was just another family dinner. Emily watched him for a moment, then walked past him toward the kitchen. She began clearing the table, stacking the plates, folding the napkins. Aaron offered to help, but she said she was fine. Her voice didn't crack. Her hands were steady. She picked up the carving knife, wiped it clean, and placed it back into its slot. Later, when the dishes were done and the kitchen was spotless, she went upstairs without a word. Aaron followed a few minutes later. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair. He leaned against the doorframe, asking if she was tired. She said yes. Then she smiled at him, the same smile she had given everyone all evening. A smile that looked soft but felt cold inside. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. She closed her eyes, but her mind stayed sharp. Tomorrow she would make a call. Not to him. Not yet. She had a different plan. A quieter one. And it had already begun. Emily woke early the next morning. The sun had barely touched the curtains, and the house was still. She moved quietly, careful not to wake Aaron. He lay on his side, one hand resting near her pillow. She stared at it for a moment before turning away. Downstairs, she made coffee and stood by the window as it brewed. The garden looked peaceful. Dew rested on the grass, and a single bird hopped along the fence. It was the kind of morning she used to love. But now, the silence felt heavier. She poured her coffee and sat at the small table near the back door. Her phone was already there. She had placed it next to her notebook the night before. She tapped the screen and opened the folder she had created days ago. Inside were screenshots, copied messages, and voice memos. Nothing too detailed, but enough. She had noticed the pattern. And she had started paying attention long before the voice in the garage confirmed her worst thoughts. She took a sip of coffee and opened her notebook. There were names and times written on the first few pages. Notes she had taken in moments of doubt. She had told herself it was nothing. But now she read them with fresh eyes. The hotel receipt, the canceled dinner, the strange scent on his coat. It was all there, spread out in careful lines. Her handwriting had never looked so sharp. She flipped to a new page and began writing. This time, it wasn't a list. It was a plan. By the time Aaron came downstairs, she had already showered and was folding laundry in the living room. He greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and asked if she had slept well. She said yes. He didn't notice the pause. He poured his coffee, added too much sugar like always, and settled into the couch. He asked if she wanted to go out for breakfast. She said she had errands to run and would eat later. He nodded and pulled out his phone. She watched the way he tilted the screen away as he typed. It was subtle, but she had seen it too many times. She put on her shoes, grabbed her bag, and told him she would be back in a few hours. He barely looked up. Outside, the morning had warmed slightly. The air was crisp, and the sky was clear. She walked to the end of the street, turned the corner, and got into her car. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel before she started the engine. She didn't drive to the store. Instead, she took a longer road, one that led into the older part of town. The buildings there were quiet, the shops smaller. She parked in front of a cafe she hadn't been to in years. Inside, she found a seat near the window and ordered tea. Then she pulled out her phone and made the first call. The woman on the other end answered after a few rings. Her voice was warm but cautious. Emily introduced herself and mentioned a name. The silence that followed was short but meaningful. Then the woman spoke again, softer this time. Emily listened carefully. The details lined up. The hotel, the restaurant, the late meetings. The voice was the same one she had heard through the vent. Emily didn't show anger. She didn't raise her voice. She just asked the questions she needed to ask. The woman answered most of them. At the end, Emily thanked her. There was no bitterness in her tone. Just something firm. Something final. She ended the call and stared out the window. A mother passed by with her child. A delivery man wheeled a cart down the sidewalk. Life moved on outside, just as it had before. But something inside her had changed. She stayed at the cafe for another half hour. She wrote more notes. Not for revenge, not for a fight. Just for clarity. She wanted the full picture before she made her next move. When she returned home, Aaron was in the garage. The door was open, and he was fiddling with a toolbox. She greeted him with a smile and mentioned that the store had been crowded. He joked about the weather and asked if she had picked up the dry cleaning. She said it would be ready the next day. He didn't notice the way she studied him. The way her eyes paused on the corner of the garage where she had stood the day before. That night, she made pasta for dinner. They ate while watching a film. Aaron leaned against her shoulder, and she let him. Her movements were gentle. She laughed when the scene called for it. She even refilled his glass before he asked. Afterward, they sat on the couch, his arm draped over her shoulder. He scrolled through his phone while she stared at the television. She wasn't watching it. Her mind was elsewhere. When he stood to shower, she stayed seated. The moment she heard the water running, she picked up his phone from the side table. It wasn't locked. It hadn't been for weeks. He had stopped being careful. She opened the messages. She didn't have to scroll far. There they were. Names she already knew. Sentences that matched the voice in the garage. She read them without feeling. The images, the jokes, the private plans. They formed a shape in her head that was no longer sharp or confusing. She placed the phone back exactly as it had been. Upstairs, she brushed her teeth while Aaron dried his hair. He asked what she thought of the film. She said it was fine. He kissed her goodnight. She returned the gesture. When the lights were off and the room was quiet, she lay awake. Her eyes stared at the ceiling, her breath steady. She knew now. Not just what had happened, but who she was inside all of it. And tomorrow, she would begin. Emily didn't change anything the next morning. She acted the same way she always did. She made coffee. She fed the cat. She folded the blanket on the couch and wiped the kitchen counter. Aaron left early for work, saying he had a meeting across town. She nodded and wished him a good day. He kissed her on the forehead and left without looking back. Once the door closed, she stood still for a moment. Then she walked over and locked it. The house was quiet again. This time, the silence gave her space to think clearly. She had planned out the day. Not in detail, but with a sense of purpose. She took her notebook from the drawer and checked the list she had written at the cafe. It had names, addresses, and one reminder at the bottom. It simply said, "Stay calm." She got dressed and tied her hair back. Her clothes were simple, comfortable. She took her bag and phone and stepped outside. Instead of driving, she walked. The day was mild, and the streets weren't too crowded. She passed a few neighbors and gave them small waves. No one noticed anything different. She looked like a woman out on errands, maybe heading to the library or post office. But she walked past both those places. Her destination was quieter. It was a small building, 2 floors, tucked between a bakery and a tailor shop. The sign on the door had a name and a phone number. She had looked it up before. It was a private investigator's office. She had never thought she would walk into one. Inside, the place smelled like paper and old coffee. A woman in her 50s sat behind the front desk, wearing glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She looked up and gave Emily a polite smile. Emily spoke calmly. She explained that she had a situation. She didn't use dramatic words. She didn't cry. She simply said that she needed someone to help her understand what was really going on in her life. The woman nodded and handed her a form. Emily filled it out and waited. A few minutes later, a man stepped into the front area. He looked about 40, wore a simple jacket, and had a quiet way of moving. He invited her into a small office. She sat down and told him what she needed. Again, no details that didn't matter. She explained she had reasons to believe her husband was hiding something. She had already found pieces of the truth, but she wanted confirmation. She wanted everything to be clear before she decided what to do next. The man asked a few questions. Then he told her it was possible. It might take a few days, maybe a week. He would follow, take photos, track locations. He could even check financial movements if she needed that. She nodded and agreed to the terms. He promised to keep everything private. No sudden calls, no emails, just a report at the end. When she walked out of the building, she felt lighter. Not because she had solved anything, but because she had taken a step. A real one. She walked back home slowly. The sky was clearer now, and a few kids were playing down the street. She passed them with a small smile and unlocked her front door. Inside, the house felt different. Not warmer, not safer, but different. As if she had finally accepted what she had known all along. She made a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table. She ate in silence and then cleaned the plate right away. The day was still open and she had nowhere else to be. She spent the afternoon organizing a box of old books. It had been sitting in the guest room for over a year. She sorted them into piles. Keep, donate, sell. It felt good to touch something real. Something with weight and edges. Now and then, her mind wandered back to Aaron. Where he was. What he might be saying. Whether he noticed she was different. By evening, he still hadn't texted. Not even a check-in. When he returned home, he carried a bag from a restaurant. He said his meeting ran long and he picked up dinner on the way. He placed the food on the table and kissed her again. She smiled back. They ate together. He talked about someone at work getting a promotion. She listened, nodding where it made sense. After dinner, they watched another film. It played in the background while he scrolled through his phone and she stared at the edge of the coffee table. Before bed, he asked if she had fun that day. She said it was quiet but peaceful. He said he was glad. That night, when the lights were off, Emily lay in the dark and thought about the days ahead. She knew the man would begin watching Aaron the next morning. She wondered what he would find. Maybe more than she expected. Maybe nothing surprising at all. But the point wasn't the proof. Not anymore. The point was that she wasn't waiting anymore. She had spent too long pretending. Too long trying to explain away the odd moments. The late returns. The strange looks. The quiet whispers when the garage door closed. Now she wasn't explaining anything. Now she was watching, too. The next morning, Emily didn't hurry. She let the sun rise fully before getting out of bed. Aaron had already left. His coffee mug sat in the sink, and his cologne still lingered faintly in the hallway. She didn't miss him. She just noticed he was gone. She made breakfast slowly and sat by the window while eating. Outside, the world moved as it always did. A dog barked across the street. A delivery truck pulled up beside the neighbor's house. Life didn't stop just because hers felt off balance. She checked her phone. No messages. No updates. She hadn't expected any yet. The man had said it might take days. Still, the waiting was sharp, like holding her breath underwater. To stay calm, she picked a task. She decided to clean the garage. It had been months since she had touched anything in there. The shelves were dusty, the corners full of cobwebs. She found old paint cans, broken tools, a folded camping chair they never used. Halfway through, she opened a box that didn't belong. It had no label. Inside were cables, chargers, 2 small phones with cracked screens, and a bundle of receipts. They weren't hers. She sat down on the cold floor and looked through the papers. Most were from gas stations, small shops, and restaurants she didn't recognize. One was from a motel in a nearby town, dated 2 weeks ago. She didn't feel angry. She didn't cry. She simply placed the receipts back inside and closed the box. She didn't need to guess anymore. She just needed to know how far it went. She left the garage door open to let the air in. She washed her hands, then sat down at the table and wrote in her notebook again. Not about feelings, just facts. Time. Place. What she found. She had started treating her own life like a puzzle someone else might try to solve one day. That afternoon, she went to the grocery store. She didn't need much. Just milk, fruit, a loaf of bread. She pushed the cart slowly, looking at the shelves without really seeing them. The lights felt too bright, the music too loud. Still, it was better than sitting at home and waiting. While checking out, the cashier asked if she wanted to donate a small amount to a local shelter. She nodded. It felt good to say yes to something that mattered. Back home, she put everything away and looked around the house again. Nothing had changed. The pictures on the wall, the plants by the window, the small dent in the table corner from when Aaron had dropped a vase. All still there. But she didn't see the house the same way anymore. When evening came, she cooked pasta. She didn't ask Aaron what he wanted. She just made it. When he arrived, he looked tired and didn't say much. He noticed the garage had been cleaned and asked what got into her. She said she had the time. He nodded and went to change his clothes. At dinner, they barely spoke. The silence didn't feel strange to him. He had stopped noticing it a long time ago. To him, quiet just meant everything was fine. After they ate, he checked his emails. She sat beside him, pretending to scroll through her phone. Her thoughts were far away. She wondered where he had gone that day, who he had seen, if he had felt watched, if he even noticed. That night, after he fell asleep, she got out of bed and walked through the house in the dark. She opened each door quietly, checking every space like she was searching for something. Maybe she just needed to feel like she was still in control. In the living room, she stood still and listened. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. The house kept its secrets well. She returned to bed and stared at the ceiling. Her heart wasn't racing. Her breath was steady. She wasn't scared anymore. She was just tired of pretending. Lying there, she thought about who she used to be. Before the doubts. Before the long silences. Before the growing space between her and the man who still wore a ring he didn't respect. She remembered how she used to laugh more. How she used to sing while cooking. How she used to trust the sound of the front door opening, not dread it. Now she didn't trust the door, the voice, the smiles, or the late nights. But she trusted herself. That was something new. She turned on her side and pulled the blanket higher. Sleep came slowly, but it came. Tomorrow would bring something. She didn't know what. But she would be ready for it. The next day began like any other. The sky was gray and rain tapped lightly on the windows. Emily sat by the kitchen table, her coffee growing cold beside her. She hadn't touched it yet. She was waiting again. Just before noon, her phone vibrated. A message appeared, short and simple. The man she had met had found something. He asked to meet that evening, same place, same time. Emily read the message twice, then deleted it. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both understood. The hours dragged. She tried to stay busy. She vacuumed, folded laundry, made soup she didn't feel like eating. Aaron had left early again without saying much. He had gotten comfortable with silence. When evening finally came, she changed into plain clothes and tied her hair back. She told herself not to expect too much. Answers didn't always bring peace. Sometimes they just opened new questions. She drove with the windows down, letting the cold air hit her face. It kept her awake. The streets were mostly empty, and traffic lights changed without much purpose. The world felt quiet, like it was waiting too. She reached the diner early. The same waitress was there, and the same dull light filled the room. Emily picked the same booth and ordered tea this time. Her hands were cold. The man arrived 5 minutes later, coat soaked from the rain. He didn't bother with greetings. He slid into the booth across from her and placed a small envelope on the table. She didn't touch it. He explained what he found. He spoke quietly, but clearly. Names, times, places. The woman Aaron had been seeing worked in a town 2 hours away. They had met in that motel more than once. He had even transferred money to her recently. There were copies of messages and call logs, all printed and neatly folded in the envelope. Emily didn't interrupt. She just listened. When he finished, she nodded once. She thanked him and paid for his tea before leaving. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights reflected in the puddles like broken glass. She stood by her car and held the envelope in her hand for a while. She thought about throwing it away, but she didn't. At home, the lights were on. Aaron's car was in the driveway. She stepped inside, hung her coat, and walked past him without speaking. He was watching television, feet on the table like nothing in the world was wrong. She went upstairs, changed, and put the envelope in the drawer of her nightstand. She didn't open it again. Not yet. Later, when they sat down for dinner, Aaron mentioned a trip he had to take for work. He said it casually with no details. She nodded and said nothing. He took her silence as permission. After dinner, he went back to his usual routine. Emily sat in the kitchen with her notebook. She didn't write. She just turned the pages and looked at what she had written before. Every line felt like it belonged to someone else now. The clock ticked. The house settled into its nightly rhythm. Distant sounds from the television filled the space. She thought about the motel receipts, the phone records, the woman's name, the money. Everything had a place now. The picture was complete. But she still didn't know what she wanted to do. Revenge wasn't her style. Confrontation didn't tempt her either. She wasn't interested in yelling or demanding anything. She wanted peace. And she was learning that sometimes peace came only after walking away. She made a list that night. It was short. 3 items. A storage unit, a post office box, a friend who owed her a favor. Just steps. Nothing dramatic. Aaron went to bed before her. He never asked why she stayed up late so often. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he didn't want to know. When she finally went upstairs, she didn't turn on the light. She climbed into bed, stared at the ceiling again, and felt her breath rise and fall. Everything she needed to know was already in her hands. All that remained now was the decision. She didn't cry. She didn't feel broken. She felt clear. The next morning, she would start with the first item on her list. She wouldn't say anything yet. There was no need. Not until she was ready. And when the time came, she wouldn't look back. Emily left early the next morning, before Aaron was awake. The sky was still dark and a soft fog covered the ground. She packed a few things in a small bag, some papers, extra clothes, and her notebook. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for now. She drove across town to a quiet, industrial area where storage units sat in long rows. They looked alike, cold and simple. She had chosen one the night before through an online form. The process had been quick. No one asked questions. Inside the unit, she placed her bag in the corner and stood still for a moment. The space was empty and quiet. It gave her a strange kind of comfort. She was building something of her own here, even if it was only a small beginning. She locked the door and drove to the post office next. A woman behind the counter helped her choose a box. Emily signed the forms and paid in cash. It felt like another step forward. Something solid and real. Her final stop was a small cafe near the park. She hadn't been there in years, not since college. But the person she came to meet was already waiting. A friend from before her marriage, someone she had once trusted with everything. They spoke quietly over tea. Emily explained only what was necessary. The friend listened without judgment. When Emily asked for help, she didn't hesitate. She gave Emily a spare key to her apartment, just in case things moved faster than expected. Emily felt lighter when she left. There was a plan now, and it was moving forward. She still had doubts, but they didn't stop her. She knew what she had to do. By the time she got home, it was late afternoon. Aaron was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and asked where she had been. Emily simply said she went for a drive. He didn't ask more. The silence between them had become normal. It filled every room, thick and unspoken. They moved around each other like shadows, never touching. That night, Aaron packed for his work trip. He didn't mention when he would return. Emily helped him fold a shirt, then walked away without a word. She watched him from the hallway as he zipped his suitcase. When morning came, he left early. Emily heard the door close, then the sound of the car pulling away. She stood at the window and waited until he was gone. Only then did she open the envelope from the private investigator again. She read every page slowly. This time, she didn't feel shocked. She just felt tired. Everything made sense now, the changes in his routine, the lies, the coldness. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. She placed the papers back inside, then opened her notebook. She began writing down what mattered, the accounts they shared, the bills in both names, the things she could claim. Her handwriting was steady. She made calls throughout the day. Quiet calls to banks and lawyers. She didn't rush. She was careful. She wanted to do this the right way, on her terms. Later that afternoon, she visited the apartment her friend had offered. It was small but warm. A few plants sat on the windowsill, and the walls were painted soft colors. Emily stood in the middle of the room and closed her eyes. It didn't feel like home yet, but it could. When she returned to her house, she didn't unpack. She didn't take off her coat. She walked through each room slowly, taking in the things she had once loved. A photograph on the wall. A book on the table. A jacket over the back of a chair. This place had held her life for years, but it didn't feel like hers anymore. She sat on the couch and picked up her phone. She stared at the screen for a long time before typing a message to her lawyer. Just a few lines. A question about timing. A request to move forward. She didn't press send yet. She needed one more night. The house was quiet again that evening. She made herself a simple dinner, then curled up on the couch with a blanket. She watched an old movie with the sound low, more for comfort than entertainment. Outside, the wind picked up. Tree branches tapped against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't confused. She was waiting for the right moment. And when it came, she would be ready. The next morning felt different. The house was cold, but not because of the weather. It was the silence, sharper than usual. Emily moved slowly, as if each step meant something. She made tea, held the warm cup in both hands, and stood by the window. The street was empty. No cars passed. No voices drifted in. Her phone buzzed once. A message from the lawyer. The papers were ready. They just needed her signature. She read the message twice, then locked her phone and set it on the counter. She wasn't rushing this. She walked upstairs and opened the closet. Half the clothes didn't belong to her. She pulled out a small suitcase and placed it on the bed. It was the same one she had used years ago for a short trip, back when everything still felt whole. She began packing, not in a hurry, not with fear. Just what she needed. Comfortable clothes. Her notebook. The envelope. A few photos she still cared about. The rest she left. In the bathroom, she paused. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, faint lines, but steady. There was no sadness now, only a calm sort of strength. She turned away from the mirror without looking again. She left a short note on the kitchen table. Not a full explanation. Just enough to be clear. It was not angry. It was not bitter. It was the truth, written in simple words. She locked the front door behind her, slipped the key into her coat pocket, and walked to the car. The morning air was cool, but she didn't feel it much. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel. Driving through town, she passed familiar places, the grocery store, the library, the small park with the bench where they once sat and laughed. She didn't look away. She didn't let the memories stop her. At the lawyer's office, the assistant greeted her with a kind smile. Emily nodded politely and waited in a small room filled with soft chairs and quiet ticking. When her name was called, she entered without hesitation. The lawyer handed her the papers, explained the sections in a calm voice. Emily listened carefully, asked one or two short questions, then took the pen. Her hand didn't shake as she signed. Each signature felt like a step forward, a door opening. When it was done, the lawyer placed the documents into a folder and said they would begin the process today. She nodded, thanked him, and left the building. She didn't cry. She didn't second-guess. She drove to the apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The light from the window was soft. Her bag still sat in the corner where she had left it. She unpacked the few things she had brought and placed them in drawers. She made the bed, placed her notebook on the nightstand, and hung one of the photos on the wall. It wasn't much, but it made the space feel warmer. In the kitchen, she boiled water and made tea again. The same kind as before, but this time it tasted better. She sat at the table and opened her notebook. She flipped to a clean page and began writing. Not about the past, but about the future. Small plans. Simple goals. She wrote about the kind of work she wanted to do. The kind of life she hoped to build. She didn't think in big dreams. Just clear steps. Later that day, she went for a walk. The streets near the apartment were quiet, lined with trees and small shops. She passed a bookstore, a bakery, and a florist. She stopped in front of the flowers for a moment, then bought a small bunch of white ones. She returned home, placed them in a glass by the window, and watched them sway slightly in the breeze. Evening came slowly. She cooked something simple and ate while watching the sunset through the window. The sky turned orange, then pink, then finally dark. There was no message from Aaron. No missed calls. No surprise visits. And she didn't expect any. She turned off the lights and lay in bed. The quiet around her no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. She closed her eyes, not with fear or doubt, but with the feeling that she had finally done something right. And for the first time in a long while, she slept through the night. The next few days passed with a calm rhythm. Emily started waking up earlier. Not because she had to, but because the silence in the morning was now peaceful instead of lonely. She made tea without rushing. She stood by the same window, watching the same street, but something inside her had shifted. She began taking longer walks through the neighborhood. She found small streets she hadn't noticed before. One morning, she discovered a park tucked between two buildings. It had a small pond, a wooden bench, and a few ducks moving quietly through the water. She started bringing a book there each afternoon. Reading became part of her routine again. She had stopped reading months ago, maybe years. But now she found comfort in quiet pages and simple stories. She also started helping at the bookstore down the street. On her second visit, the woman who owned the shop asked if she'd be interested in part-time work. Emily didn't hesitate. She organized shelves, recommended books to customers, and cleaned the reading corner. It wasn't about money. It was about purpose. The woman who owned the store was kind but quiet. She didn't ask too many questions, and Emily liked that. They spoke mostly about books, tea, and the weather. After her shifts, Emily often stopped by the bakery next door for a roll or a slice of cake. The man behind the counter always gave her a smile and sometimes added an extra cookie without charging. At home, the apartment started to feel lived in. She added small things: a lamp, a new set of plates, a pillow for the couch. Nothing fancy, just enough to make the space feel hers. One evening, while going through her notebook, she flipped back to the page where she had written her plans. Most of them were simple. Try something new each week. Read more. Write often. Heal. She looked at the last line. It said, "Forgive yourself." She hadn't thought about that part much until now. That night, she wrote about the things she had once blamed herself for. For not seeing the signs sooner. For staying too long. For walking away. As the words filled the page, she felt something lift. Not all at once. Just a little. But it was enough. A few days later, she received a letter. It was from Aaron. He had written it by hand. She sat at the table with the letter in her hands for a long time before opening it. He didn't beg. He didn't try to change anything. He just wrote that he was sorry. He admitted to many things. He didn't hide behind excuses. At the end of the letter, he said he hoped she was okay. Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel sad. She just felt done. That night, she didn't write anything in her notebook. She didn't need to. The next morning, she brought fresh flowers for the glass by the window. This time, she chose yellow ones. Bright and simple. At the bookstore, she suggested starting a weekend reading group. The owner smiled and agreed. They made a small sign and placed it in the window. 3 people came the first weekend. They sat on soft chairs, drank tea, and talked about the book. Emily listened more than she spoke, but she felt part of something. That night, she walked home slowly, enjoying the quiet street. She stopped by the pond in the little park. The ducks were gone, but the water reflected the sky like glass. She stood there for a long time, watching the moon come out. And as she walked back to her apartment, there was no fear about what the next day would bring. She had no big plans, no perfect answers. But she had found something steady inside her, something that stayed. Weeks passed. The days grew warmer. People in the neighborhood started wearing lighter clothes. Windows stayed open longer. Laughter could be heard from balconies and sidewalks. Emily noticed all of it. At the bookstore, more people joined the reading group. A teenager who always wore headphones. An older man who never said much but brought cookies to share. A young woman who had just moved to the city and seemed nervous at first. Emily welcomed them all. She found joy in these small gatherings. They didn't talk about deep things. Just stories, characters, favorite lines. But there was comfort in it. It felt like connection without pressure. One afternoon, as she was restocking the mystery section, the shop owner asked if she'd ever thought of writing her own stories. Emily paused. She hadn't. Not seriously. Not since school. But the idea stayed with her. That night, she opened a new page in her notebook. She wrote a sentence. Then another. The words didn't flow easily, but they came. She didn't worry if they were good or not. She just kept writing. She started spending her evenings at the desk near the window, filling pages. Some nights she wrote for hours. Other nights, just a paragraph. But she didn't stop. It became part of her. The apartment felt different now. Not just a place to stay, but a place to live. The kitchen had the scent of tea and warm bread. The couch had a soft blanket. Her shoes were by the door. It was hers. One Saturday, she visited the park with a basket of food and a small blanket. She sat by the pond and watched the ducks move slowly. A few children played nearby. Their laughter reminded her of something distant but not painful. She ate a sandwich and read a few pages from a book. After a while, she closed it and just listened to the wind. There was no rush to be anywhere. No one waiting to call her back. The peace felt full. Later that evening, she received a message from a neighbor in the building. They were organizing a small dinner on the rooftop. Would she like to come? She hesitated, then said yes. The rooftop was filled with simple lights and soft music. People brought dishes to share. Someone played the guitar. Emily sat with them, spoke when she wanted, listened when she didn't. She laughed once, then again. It felt easy. Someone asked what she did. She said she worked at the bookstore. And then, almost without thinking, added that she was writing something. No one asked what it was about. They just nodded, smiled, and passed the bread. When she returned to her apartment that night, she stood by the window again. The street below was quiet. A few lights were still on in nearby buildings. She thought of the road that had brought her here. The tears, the fear, the long nights. The silence that had once felt like a wall now felt like space to breathe. She didn't know what the next year would bring. Maybe she would write a book. Maybe not. Maybe she would stay in this apartment. Maybe she would move again. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of not knowing. She washed her face, turned off the light, and climbed into bed. The room was quiet, but inside her, everything felt alive. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe for a surprising video tomorrow.